Hey guys, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's lecture. I just want to remind you as we are going through today's lecture, you need to be filling out your lecture notes that were printed out for you. If you did not receive a copy or if you have misplaced yours, I have posted a PDF of those notes online for you to fill out. So the way this is going to work, sometimes I'll use the maps behind me, but most of the time I will have up on the screen a PowerPoint slideshow that we'll kind of go through and talk about some of the various things on it. I want to make you guys a couple guarantees. That is that everything that will be on your test eventually is found within these notes. Okay. Now we will do a lot of extras. We will do some stuff out of the book. We'll do, of course, different assignments. We'll do different discussion boards. Those are all to kind of prop up the information that you learn here in the lecture notes. So this is not an ideal format. This is, having discussions in class is one of my favorite things that I do. So, I'm really missing out on that, and we'll try to find ways to replicate that as best as possible. But one thing I do want you to know is that I expect you to have questions from this. If you watch this entire thing and you don't have any questions, there's an issue. We need to always dig a little bit deeper when it comes to this stuff. So I want to make sure that you understand that you have the ability to both email me questions, and after some lectures, not necessarily this one, but after some lectures, we'll have discussion boards that I will ask you to post on and to identify either questions or just items that you found to be interesting. So please make sure that you do reach out if you have any questions. I have given you guys in those notes columns on both sides, in the margins, that you guys, I would like you to write out notes. This is something I highly suggest my IB kids do. And so I want you guys, being advanced American history, to start doing that as well. So just as we go through in those blank margins off to the side, if you do have a question, just jot it down. And then you can either email me or, again, put it in a discussion board. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So if you want to find page 1 of your fill in the blank notes, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me pull up the slideshow here and get everything set up. All right. So our first unit, guys, is called the Industrial Revolution. So we're picking up around the late 1800s. We're going to be talking about a time where really the best way I can explain it is where muscle power, like from horses or even manual labor, is beginning to be replaced with machine power. Okay, so think about factories starting to produce goods instead of just everyone being farmers, which again, even 1800s, even into the 1900s, I mean, most people were still farmers. So we're starting to see a change, though. We're starting to see the beginning of the urban population explosion. We're starting to see cities rise up, and eventually we're going to get to skyscrapers and all that. But really, the focus of this is the transition from muscle power to machine power. And with machine power, you can make things more efficiently. You can make things quicker. So overall, we're going to see a higher rate of production overall, to where we're going to have more of a surplus. The price of goods is going to go down for people. So overall, the industrial impact had positive impacts. It does not mean that it was all positive. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the impacts that it had, both on income inequality. We're going to talk about the impacts it had on the environment, impacts that it had on the workers. We're going to see, by the end of this, where workers are, you could have your arm cut off and, they basically fire you on the spot for bleeding all over the floor. That kind of thing, today would be, shocking, but at that time there were no protections for workers. So, we're going to talk about how the Industrial Revolution created a lot of positive change in our society, but also how it sparked the need for a lot of change. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. I want to start with this quick graphic I found. Let's hope that it loads. This is showing you a history of Westward movement. We're actually going to back up a little bit before we talk about the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to discuss here as we progress westward. There's a lot of things going on here. So, as each year is ticking by, you can see, by the early 1800s, after the American Revolution, we spread across over the Appalachian Mountains, starting to inhabits, especially Ohio, Kentucky, those areas in particular. We're coming up on the Civil War at this point, and you'll notice that the landscape is starting to change. 1861 was the beginning of the Civil War. A couple things. In fact, I'm going to stop it right here. Let's pause right here. I want to point out a couple items because this is about the time frame that we are going to pick up with our lecture. So you'll notice a couple things. Number one, how far west we have spread at this point. Notice that there is some population over in California. We're going to talk about them. All right. Last year in the Super Bowl, and I'm wearing my jersey. I'm recording this on the night of the first Chiefs game, so I'm excited for the Chiefs to get out there and hopefully repeat their Super Bowl victory. But last year we defeated in the Super Bowl the 49ers. Okay, might have wondered where that name came from. Well, it's 1849, and that is when a big gold rush came through, and a lot of population moved out to California. We'll talk about that later in the notes. But you'll notice by 1872, a lot of changes have happened here, right? It's no longer just the 13 colonies. Now, all of a sudden, we have spread after 100 years after the American Revolution, we spread all the way through the area that we even populate. So if you look right here, I believe you can see my cursor. I believe that is Jackson County right there, if I'm correct. So, you can see that we've spread out. We've started populating even places like Missouri. But one other big trend that I want to point out is what's happening up here in the north. Okay, look how much darker each of these counties is. If you look over here, move my window here, the census population per square mile. So as it gets darker, that means that it's more densely populated with people. So by 1872, you see this trend beginning. And really, it's not beginning here. It's a trend that started much earlier on, but it's really starting to hit in particular on the East Coast. But you'll notice that the North is much more densely populated. Okay, in particularly these cities and states on the East Coast. You'll notice that they are the most populated states, the most populated areas in the entire country. But so that is one trend that I think is going to be important for our story, is that those population centers are rapidly growing. And I want you to take note on two things when I resume this video here. I want you to take note on, number one, how more densely populated those areas become, because over the next 20 years, we're going to start seeing a lot of immigration into those areas from Europe. Europe was dealing with a lot of issues, not only warfare, but things like famine. You might have heard of the Irish potato famine. They're going to be dealing with a lot of things in which people are seeking refuge. They're seeking not only safety, but they're seeking just some place where they can survive. So you're going to notice that one trend is that those population centers are going to become much darker because they are going to increase in population quite a bit. But the other trend that is more about what we're talking about today is happening out here in the West. All right, I want you to pay attention here. Starting 1872, let's take a look at what is happening out west, because there is a population explosion happening. So just even here within the last 10 years since I started it, you can see Kansas has been settled. Nebraska, all those. We're seeing Texas, we're seeing by the early 1900s, we're seeing Utah start to form with the Mormons moving out there. We're seeing Colorado, Denver, that's that dark center right there, as, kind of a jumping off point for people crossing the Rocky Mountains. So, look at how dark these counties are turning. So the population is definitely moving westward. Now, one thing I would like to point out, and then we'll move on here. One trend that you are going to hear from me, and one impact on history, that the more I study history, the more I realize how much this impacts every part of our history, and that is geography. Okay, geography. So you can tell a lot about a nation. Maps like this that are just showing population, but it actually tells us a lot about the geography as well. You notice, especially right here, we got kind of a dark swath right here. Well, that's a Mississippi River that's flowing right through there. So especially if we were to back up to earlier times, Oop, shoot, there we go. Sorry, technology, so much fun. So, right here you can see that, especially along the Mississippi River, look how there's almost a line there. That is the river itself. But also, as we got later into the late 1800s, notice how this area isn't becoming as populated. Well, that's because it's the Rocky Mountains. It's just much more difficult terrain to survive in. So, geography not only defines a lot of our history, but it tells us a lot about a nation. I'm going to talk a lot about how geography has been beneficial to the United States over the course of our history. So, again, just a couple things to note. The population is mainly centered in the north, in the urban cores, in those cities out east, but also by the late 1800s, the time period we're talking about now, we're seeing a lot of population explosion out west, all right? So it is continuing to move west. All right, let's go ahead and talk about that westward movement. This is where we're picking up, and so we're picking up right after the Civil War. Now, I also want to put out a disclaimer that, guys, this is a survey course, okay? Now, what that means is we're kind of like lightly skimming across the top of this history. I wish we had time to dig in deeper. I've taken entire semester classes on things like the westward movement before, so there is a ton of information out there on our history, and I hope you understand that we're not able to cover all of it, right? We'll have projects throughout the year in which you can kind of dive deeper into things that you are interested in, but we try to cover as much as possible, but still, we're not skimming the surface. There's a lot of other issues going on in this country in 1865. It's not just about westward movement. I'm not trying to portray that. In fact, next unit, we're going to talk a lot more about the social issues that are happening from 1865 on, in particular with what's happening with Reconstruction, and in particular the Civil War amendments, where we see not only slavery ended, but we see black males getting the right to vote. We're going to talk a lot about that, so we'll talk about some of these issues that are happening concurrently. But right now, we're going to focus right here on this westward movement, the populating of the West. So this idea of manifest destiny, that might be a word you've heard of before. And you break down some of those words, right? Manifest, right? Destiny. So manifest has this idea of almost like a heavenly interjection, right? That perhaps God himself is coming down and saying that you are destined to spread westward. And frankly, a lot of people felt like that. So there had always been this idea that Americans were fated to reach the Pacific. Okay, that this was going to be a land that extended from sea to shining sea, which of course we know now did come true. But one thing I want you to realize, and we're really going to dig into this in our third unit, is that America has always been a somewhat imperialistic nation, because we started out as these 13 colonies, but we have continued to spread out and to take over more and more area. It just happened to be connected. In the same period, you have nations like Britain that are going out, gathering up a much larger empire. We will make that move later on, but right now we're kind of focused on subjugating the area around us. But eventually we will get there. Hawaii, Guam, these far off remote areas that will fall under American dominion. That is coming. But right now, let's just focus on settling the West there. So 1803 is when we see the first real, I guess not necessarily the first. After the American Revolution, we really doubled our size. But even from that, we went all the way from the East Coast to the Mississippi River. The Louisiana Purchase doubled our size even further. So, by 1840, 40% of the population is moving westward, and they're looking, they're moving westward for land, for, the social mobility is not as easy as it, I shouldn't say easy, but perhaps the social mobility was not as common back then as it is today, to where you could make something of yourself. If you were kind of stuck in your station when you were born, in the early 1800s. So for many people, the only chance that they had at, having a better life was picking up and taking what little they owned and moving out into this frontier, into this wilderness. I want to talk very quickly about this, some of the images I have up here, and let me see if I can move my webcam. Hopefully that's updating in the video as well. So let's take a look at some of these images, because I think this really talks a lot about how we portray westward movement and also some of their feelings at the time. Many of these paintings are from contemporary times, in particular the one at the bottom, and I think this really shows manifest destiny more than anything. This idea that God has fated Americans to reach from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. You notice in the bottom picture, you have this angelic figure, right? I mean, you have this figure who, not human, floating across the landscape, and she's holding in her hands a couple of items. First of all, a Bible, and that does portray, bringing, bringing religion to the darkness, right? And we'll talk about the colors here in a second. Also, she's holding telegraph wire, which of course to us is not necessarily the most update technology, but this telegraph wire represents kind of the foremost technology of the age. So spreading not only religion but technology and overall civilization, right? And that's a big part of this. It's not just moving westward, but because it's not open land, right? I mean, there were people living there that had been living there for thousands of years. This was an idea of bringing them a benefit. Okay, and we'll talk about whether that was actually a benefit to them or not later on. And spoiler alert, it wasn't. So anyways, but look at the colors of this picture. I think this really symbolizes westward movement greater than anything. So, you have out east, right, to the right of this picture, you have these light colors, this, glorious, sophisticated area. You see trains, you see ships in the harbor, you see cities popping up, civilization, right? What do you see out west? Right, you see darkness, you see rain clouds, you see Native Americans that are barely clothed, uncivilized barbarians, as they would have considered them. So this is kind of our story of manifest destiny, that there is almost a heavenly presence in our pursuit to grab the land out west, and we're pushing the darkness out. Right? There's motion to this painting, right? We are moving west. We're pushing the darkness out, replacing it with light. And not to say that there weren't some benefits, but of course, we're going to wrap up the lecture today by talking about the impact on Native Americans, and quite tragic, one of the most tragic stories in American history. All right, well, let's talk about those who are traveling west. Agriculture and mining; those are the two main big industries that are going to be moving out west and taking advantage of this somewhat open land. America is truly a blessed nation in terms of how many natural resources we have. You think about a small little country like, again, Great Britain, right? They're an island, right? They, part of the reason that they ended up resorting to empire was because they had to go out and get their resources. Well, America, we didn't necessarily have to go out as early as they did to get those resources. We had a lot of those resources here within our lands, and especially as we continue to add more land to our country. So mining is going to be one of the biggest industries. Gold, silver, timber, not only for our usage, but we're also shipping those materials throughout the world. So one term, prospectors, you have kind of the grizzly old prospector here with his trusty old mule. And so, you did have guys going, and women, everyone was traveling out west in search for gold. I mentioned the 49ers, kind of spoiled this little story here, but mentioned the 49ers previously in the lecture. 1849, there's gold discovered out west, and you do have a rush of people that go and try to find that gold, most of which do not. But some do get rich, and especially the first few years of that gold rush, they're coming back out east with just, they found treasure. They literally dug in the ground and found treasure. Man, if that doesn't spark curiosity and adventure for people, I don't know what will. So you do have thousands of people move west, and that's really one thing that kind of sparks westward movement, at least initially. Most of them heading towards California. Later on, of course, there will be settlements in other areas. So this kind of leads to a phenomenon called boom towns. Take a look at the picture on the bottom left there, right? So, what had been really uninhabited area, sometimes overnight there would be buildings that would pop up for necessary supply. As people move west, they may not be settling in these areas, but perhaps they're in need of, repairs to their wagon. They're in needs of more supplies. Maybe they've broken some wheels and they, need to buy new wheels. Also, other things. With Westward movement came all of, the pros and negatives. I mean, there's a lot of vices that are being supplied by these boom towns as well. So, just like we see in the movies, boom towns were kind of often rowdy, lawless, Dodge City, right? I mean, these areas that, it seemed like there, people were spending most of their time in the saloons, and there were gunfights in the streets. That was reality for some of these boom towns, not all, but really, what would happen was if one location, if there was gold found in the river, there would be kind of a town that would form basically overnight, and then next thing you know, if the gold started running out, well, everybody would leave, and now all of a sudden, these boom towns turn into ghost towns. All right, let's talk about ranching and cattle drives. So, you think about, the West, uninhabited for the most part, of course, excluding Native American populations, which for the most part still remained, of course, tribal, many of them moving around, hunting buffalo and whatever, animals were native to that area. So, early on with farmers, they used the open range, right? You might have heard that term. So the plains are open. There's really not private property at this time. Farmers just kind of moved around with their cattle and allowed them to kind of eat, the grass as they just kind of moved along. But that really starts to change in 1867 when you have the invention of barbed wire. I imagine at some point maybe you even scraped yourself on some barbed wire fence. This is a relatively simple invention, but this does tremendous wonders out west, because now all of a sudden you have people that can assume plots of land, and very cheaply they can fence off large swaths of land. And so you start seeing the West not only being claimed, but start being divided up. And so this is kind of the beginning of that settlement, is just even, being able to plot out your land and define it with a very cheap fencing in barbed wire. At this point, I'm going to bring it back here. I want to show you guys this map that has been behind me the whole time. Usually in the classroom, I would show you this. So we got a couple things happening here. Number one, the dark orange, going back to population, right? The dark orange had been settled by 1890. So you can see kind of how far we had spread by 1890. But some of the other colors, I don't know if they're showing up too well here. The big thing I want to mention is the purple dotted lines. Okay, you see these coming all the way from San Antonio up to Sedalia. Okay, you might have driven through Sedalia or gone to the state fair in Sedalia. Also cutting through what is now Oklahoma and Indian Territory up to Salina and Abilene, through Wichita, Dodge City. All these purple lines are cattle trails. Okay. What you have happen in the late 1800s is, in particular, this, these farmers in the South, they would take huge, thousands of heads of cattle, and they would allow them to graze in kind of this open area that had been, basically unclaimed for the most part at that point. Remember, we had just gotten Texas and really all this area from Mexico in the 1840s. So, this still was relatively unsettled, unpopulated, and so a lot of farmers took advantage of that by allowing their cattle to kind of roam. But then they had to get it to market, right? As a farmer, it doesn't do you any good to have a ton of cattle. You only need a couple to eat off of, so they had to sell it. So they're bringing their cattle all the way up here to this black line, and that is the railroad. All right, that's going to be a big part of what we talk about. The railroad, you can see that it cut right through here, really kind of followed what I-70, what Interstate 70 follows today. But you'll notice that it cuts right through our home area, okay, Kansas City. You can see that, it cut and the railroad went right through that. In fact, it's one reason that in fact, this time period, St. Joseph actually had a larger population than Kansas City. But the railroad is partly what saved it. Also, some bridges that got put in, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So basically, you had these cattle drives where these guys would take thousands of heads of cattle and they would push them all the way to market via the railroad. You may have wondered why Kansas City is so well known for barbecue. Okay. This is it right here. It's a part of our history. These cattle drives pushed all that cattle up, and Kansas City, for at least part of our history, was the last stop of the railroad. So, a lot of those cattle drives early on came to Kansas City, where those cattle would be slaughtered and butchered, and then the meat would be shipped off east to feed the population centers out east. So why is Kansas City so big in barbecue? It's literally a part of our history for a very, very long time. So anyways, I've always found that to be interesting. So let me see here. Course. All right, so let's go ahead and get back to the cattle trails and talking about some of these. So I would like you to know a couple of the big ones here. So the Chisholm Trail in particular, there was an Abilene Trail, but the Chisholm Trail, look at these numbers. 1.5 million cattle was being moved from Texas all the way up to Abilene, Kansas, just in 1867 alone. 1.5 million. That's just a crazy amount. So a lot of cattle moving through this area, and again, that last point there becomes big business. You got a lot of cattle, you're going to have a lot of barbecue. So I guess I'm appreciative of this part of our history for Kansas City, especially when I'm eating at either Joe's Kansas City or I would say, man, I don't know what my favorite is. I love them all, I truly do, but we got a lot of good choices here. All right, now 1862. This is actually during the Civil War. This is one of the laws that Abraham Lincoln signs into effect. It is called the Homestead Act, and part of the Homestead Act the purpose was to try and settle the West. There was a lot of land that was just owned by the government, right? They had bought it from the French in Louisiana Purchase. But there was nobody really living there. So they again, I always put an asterisk on that. There were people living there, Native Americans, and they will be pushed out and often brutally. So I do not want to skip over that part of the history, but just to kind of simplify this, the government was trying to get white settlers to move into this area, and the Homestead Act did that. Basically, if you went to an open area out west, you could claim up to 160 acres if you lived on that 160 acres and improved it in some way over a period of 5 years. You stay there 5 years, the 160 acres is yours. There are very, very few times in human history have governments just basically offered up free land to people, and people jumped on it. This was something that became very popular, and you could basically claim a huge farm, 160 acres. You can do a lot of damage with 160 acres. People are moving out west. As I said, those that may feel as if their lot in life, they're kind of stuck in their station out east. This is a great opportunity to move out west and to hopefully get some good farmland. The final part I want to talk about today is something I've alluded to a couple times, and that is the plight of Native Americans during this period. Now, of course, even before white settlers had arrived from Europe, Native American peoples had been here for thousands of years, and in some ways, they were living very similar lifestyles to how they had for those thousands of years, even by the time Europeans arrive, and by the late 1800s when Americans are starting to move west. Vastly different culture, vastly different, a lot of barriers, language, just even cultural emphasis. This was kind of destined to clash. It could have been handled, of course, much better. And this is one of what I consider one of the darkest chapters in American history, because we will see, I use the word genocide very lightly, but I think it is very difficult when you look at the numbers and you look at some of the policies that were enacted at this time. We don't like to look at it. We don't like to think about this, but this population is going to be decimated, and they are going to be killed off, not only just straight through with government policy. I mean, soldiers pushing these people out, but we even have examples of trading diseased blankets. I mean, knowing that smallpox would destroy a population, even trading them blankets with smallpox on it. So this is a very sad history, and I guess this is a good time to talk about it. We would always have this conversation if we were in class. I love American history. I love America. I think this is a land that we have more freedoms than most, and I'm very proud of that. There are dark points in our history, and I think sometimes we try to gloss over those to try and either paint America as just a perfect place. It's not a perfect place, and we have to go back and we have to look at some of these darker moments in American history to understand where we went wrong. Because if we don't do that, I mean, we've all heard that old tribe of if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat that, and that's partially true. But listen, if we don't learn when we've made mistakes, who's to say that we're not either going to make those same mistakes or at least not going to learn the lessons from them? Our impact on the Native American peoples was a mistake. I mean, this is we broke treaty after treaty. We the policies, I mean, literally resulted in execution of these people. I say this with a heavy heart. I want you to know that I don't take these things lightly. But the Native Americans peoples, even today, their numbers are still very much decimated, and are still the poorest communities in our entire country. Here recently with coronavirus, the highest percentages of coronavirus are hitting Native American communities. We're seeing that, high incidences of drug abuse, of alcoholism, mainly due to the poverty within these areas. So this is still, you look at those areas today and, we try to explain, why is that? Why is that? Guys, we got to go back and we got to look at where they came from. So this is the beginning of that story. Really not even the beginning. This is about midway point of that story. Well, let's take a look. I'm getting way ahead of myself here. So, part of the I guess, problem, if you wanted to call it, of Native American culture was the fact that there were so many tribes that for sometimes centuries had been warring that when you had this greater threat, some of them were unwilling to come together really to kind of face that. So what you have as settlers begin to move out west are a lot of disorganized tribes that they had tried to form confederations at times. It didn't often work out. Basically, instead of uniting to form a stronger front, basically each of these tribes is trying to push back settlers on their own, and it just doesn't work out. So, look how diverse this population is. The tribes of what would be America here. I mean, and almost every single one of these has their own language, has their own culture, but this is very difficult. Each one individually trying to protect their own land. It's an impossible job, especially when you consider the technological advantage of those settlers moving in with the weaponry that they will be bringing with them, and just the sheer population. We do have to take a look at some of the clashes that happen between Native Americans and the U.S. government. Again, not a bright point in American history, but one that must be discussed to understand kind of history fully. 1864, and this is not the first. I have picked a handful that I think are important, but these are not the only stories of clashes between, and I'm not even going into the dozens of treaties that were signed and then broken by the U.S. government. But 1864, the Sand Creek Massacre, in this case, the Cheyenne, they actually were going to offer kind of a peace treaty. Their chief, Black Kettle, went to an American fort, and what ended up happening here was the the soldiers in the fort actually used that opportunity, knowing that the chief was gone, to attack the settlement and basically to drive those people out. So trying to use the fact that their leader was gone to create division and an opportunity to attack. Just absolutely terrible. We're all familiar with Little Bighorn, probably. You probably heard the story, maybe. 1876, so about some decades later. General Custer, man on the bottom left. Which, first of all, Custer is a very interesting character. He was a Civil War veteran. He had been at Gettysburg. But, man, he was a little bit different. You'll notice his attire. Most soldiers did not dress with these long white gloves or this scarf, He was just a little bit different. And, I think I say that because I think it kind of played into his actions that day. Very prideful, frankly. General Custer was sent to basically attack some tribes in South Dakota, but what ended up happening was, and I've been to Little Bighorn. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. But what ended up happening was a heavy fog had moved in that day, and Custer had about 200 soldiers with him, and they went to attack one tribe. Well, unbeknownst to them, it was not just one tribe. There was actually an intertribal meeting happening in which there were hundreds of Native Americans that were present there. And so basically 200 men, heavily outnumbered, attacked about fivefold, and they were all massacred. So, this isn't just a one-sided story. This is not just about Native American tragedy, but, here in this case, had a lot of American lives lost as well, but unnecessarily. This, I think, is the worst one in my mind, 1890, and that is in Wounded Knee, today, what is South Dakota. The Lakota tribe had been told by local authorities that they needed to quit performing what they refer to as the ghost dance. And this was kind of a ritualistic dance in which they basically pray and dance for ancestors that had passed on. But authorities were nervous because part of this ritual, they placed on cloaks that they believed would actually stop bullets, and so they believed that this was emboldening the Lakotas to possibly attack American settlements, basically, they told them to stop. They had to stop this ghost dance. They refused to do that, and the authorities went to arrest the chief. And frankly, it was nothing but a massacre. This, sometimes that word gets used loosely. This was absolutely the case, though. About 25 Americans killed over 200 Lakota men, women, and children. This was they opened fire on an entire tribe down below. And this was not just soldier versus soldier. This was soldiers opening up fire on innocent men, women, and children. It doesn't get much worse than this. This is that dark history that, frankly, we often try to push away, but we need to understand that this happened, especially, to understand, animosities that still may exist. 1887, and the question there, what to do with the Native Americans? What do you do? By the 1880s, many of them had been pushed out. The Indian Wars are coming to an end. And so what do you do with these people that, are so different in many ways, in cultural ways and whatnot? 1887, there was a law passed called the Dawes Act, and what that did was try to assimilate. Assimilation is going to be a word we come to a lot in this first unit, and that means basically to try and to assimilate means that they would take Native Americans and they would, cut their hair. They would basically kind of destroy their cultural elements, cut their hair. They would not allow them to use their native language, instead forcing them to talk and learn, go to school, with English, being taught there. This is what forced Indians to Native Americans into reservations. They took some land and divided it up. And as you can imagine, they were not given the lush, fertile soil of the West. They were often given the marshlands and some of the poorest areas. And the bigger problem is that you're giving this land sure, on one side you might say, well, at least they're getting land from the government. But the problem is that these are not farmers, and they're not educated in those skills needed to farm. So, it'd be like giving me farmland. I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know where to get my seed. I wouldn't know what to, and it was the same thing for them. These people were hunters, and, they had never been farmers, and they were not taught those skills. And so, even if you gave them all the land in the world, to farm, they didn't, and many of them starved because of this forced assimilation. This would actually continue until 1934. I mean, this is that's 7 years before World War II. That my grandparents were alive during this period. So the Dawes Act would continue until that year, in which Native American reservation rights, some of them, were restored. So it is a continuing struggle between Native Americans to get the rights that they deserve and to get some recognition, especially considering how many of their lands have been taken from them. So, a very, very tough part of American history that is difficult to difficult pill to swallow. I think this is our last slide. Let me see. Yep. Okay. Our last slide here. Native American population. Just look at these numbers. First of all, of course, there were no census records taken among Native American populations. So all representative numbers have to be estimated at this point. There were most likely somewhere between 2 and 18 million. So we'll just say in the millions, right? There were millions of Native Americans that were living, especially out west during this period. By the time we get to the end of the 19th century, their numbers are so decimated that there are less than 500,000 of them available. And you can see in the bottom map the land in which they have been assigned, I guess. Of course, 1850, it was their land. But as settlements begin to encroach further and further, you look down in the bottom right, by 2000, how little land Native Americans still have. And again, you think about what land that is. I don't know if you've ever been to this part of the country, northern Arizona. It's nothing but desert. You look at even here, South Dakota, North Dakota. That at least that's plain land, but a lot of that's very rocky, and the Black Hills there. So, this was not necessarily the best land that even still today that they've been forced in. So, it's a very sad part of our history, but also one that we have to understand and we have to learn from if we do expect for not only relations between the two parties to get better over time, but for us to avoid these same mistakes in other parts of our country and the world. So, guys, that is going to wrap it up. This lecture was a lot longer than usual. I usually will not post lectures this long, but the introductory stuff at the beginning, kind of delayed us. So, as always, I hope you wrote down a few questions that you had throughout, and I'd be happy to answer those if you want to shoot me an email or post in a discussion board. All right, guys, have a great day. Thanks.